And thanks, Mike, for talking about marijuana. Because whether you like it or not, it's becoming a thing. So the rest of the world isn't quite like Canada and the US. My personal opinion, not necessarily that of Davidson Company, is that the movement is too far along. And that sometime down in the future, 5, 10, 20 years from now, it's going to be a global business and probably a very, very big business. So opinions, but that's how I'd see that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the global market update. First of all, thanks for coming today. Thanks for your patience. Accounting and other topics often are interesting to listen to as well. We're almost there. I've seen some new faces here today too, so that's always really nice to see, and a lot of faces that I often see that we don't always get together in person, and even 5 minutes in person is better than no minutes. So I've got a short bit, hopefully, that I'll go through, and I thought about what I wanted to talk about, because the global market out there today is complicated, and there's a lot of things going on in a lot of different countries and in a lot of different regions. And it's very, very easy to see what's going on in the US because you just have to turn on the TV. It's pretty easy to see what's going on in Canada because we live here and we're in the know. And there's 3 particular subjects that I wanted to narrow down that, at least in my view, I'd like you to think about and see how it might affect you. And at first, it seems like it may or may not. The first update I wanted to talk about was China. And China everybody knows, is becoming a big global leader. There's no doubt about that. And one of the things that I noticed trend-wise is, if you remember the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and there was a huge amount of construction, right leading up to the Olympics, and hundreds and billions of dollars of all kinds of infrastructure, right? And a lot of those construction costs became extremely high. So what happened since the Beijing Olympics, construction in China, other than residential, has declined. And a lot of the prices for the construction projects were quite high. So one observation that I made in some of my lookings around is I started thinking about the infrastructure in China and how advanced it is today versus what it was and what it may be. So I decided to look at the subway systems of 12 of the largest Chinese cities, right? And I've only got 3 examples here in front of you. The first one is Beijing. And without looking at all the details, right, you can kind of see it's a relatively complicated subway system. The population of Beijing, approximate numbers, is about 21.5 million people. Then let's flip through another city. Guangzhou, also a large Chinese metropolis city with a population of 44 million people. Pretty sophisticated subway system as well. However, if I go back, Beijing, pretty detailed. City with twice as much population as Beijing, not nearly as sophisticated. Okay, now let's go through the third city. Chongqing, population of 30 million people. Okay, looks pretty bare. Let's go back again. Beijing, 21.5 million people. Guangzhou, 44 million people. Chongqing, 30 million people. And if you look at the next 10 cities after that, what you'll quickly start to discover is that the infrastructure in China is just beginning. And the amount of construction that the Chinese government wants to undertake over the next 5, 10, 20 years is going to be incredible. With that, there's the third component, which is the new Silk Road that China wants to build. And if you look at it, okay, and you start looking at all the belts, and you start to say to yourself, wow, those are long routes. And some of it is by sea, some of it is by land, and some of it is by plane. In speaking to many of our Chinese colleagues and our affiliations globally, a lot of companies are starting to set up construction companies in China. And the reason why they're doing that is because there's a big belief that that industry is going to become incredibly huge in the next 20 years or so. So you sit here and you say to yourself, well, why does it matter to me? How does that affect me? Well, it takes a lot of commodities to build trains and planes and automobiles and boats. It takes a lot of engineers and geologists and accountants and lawyers and all kinds of sorts of stuff. So China in itself, there's concerns about the debt bubbles in China, and there was also concerns about the debt bubbles in the US as well. And believe it or not, the way the Chinese government and the American government are handling the debt crisis isn't that different. What the Americans did is they shored up all their big banks, put equity into them, and some of those big banks either repaid the equity or repaid the loans, and then they cleaned up their debt, and now the big banks in the US are doing pretty well. Well, the Chinese banks are doing something pretty similar. A lot of the state-owned Chinese banks, what they're doing is they got a ton of debt right now because they lent to a lot of construction companies, and those banks are taking a lot of that debt and converting it into asset management companies, therefore cleaning up the big banks' balance sheets. So while there's a lot of concern about the Chinese debt bubble, sure, there is one. I am of the view that it isn't as problematic as it might seem out there. So that's the China story. My next story is artificial intelligence. How many people have heard of what artificial intelligence is? Can I pick on somebody? Blaine, what does artificial intelligence mean?
Everybody don't know.
Okay, but you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
Has anybody else heard of it and can tell me what they think it might mean? Volunteer. Oh, I'm gonna pick, oh, somebody way in the back there. Can you stand up for me?
So basically, I think we all understand this, but I'll take the rest. Computers, they're becoming really smart, like robots, and they're doing their thinking like human beings. So the more we can program them to do that, we get intelligent computers that can do more of what we can do and help us.
Okay, I like what you said, one particular thing. Think like human beings. We all think that robots will never be able to do that. However, it's changing. And I'll play this commercial in just a moment. I attended a seminar where they were talking about driverless cars, right? And driverless cars, the technology for it has actually been around for a really, really long time, like 20 years or something. And yet, it's still not a thing, right? And most automobile companies who have designed this technology will tell you that it's 99% safe. It's just as safe as if you drove it. And let's say you believe that, okay? It's just as safe as a human driving the car. 94% of people, though, do not want to get a driverless car. They prefer a human to drive there, even though it's been studied scientifically that those cars are safe without a driver. So what's missing a lot of this on artificial intelligence is the human side of it. At the end of the day, Siri is an artificial intelligence mechanism. It's a computer that's going to talk to you and tell you how to do stuff. And why it matters to many of us in the room here is because artificial intelligence, in whatever form it will come about with time, will affect each person that's sitting in this room. As an auditor, for example, there's technologies now available where, say, I'm auditing accounts receivable. And accounts receivable has multiple customers in multiple jurisdictions, and it's complicated. There's software today being built where you're going to punch in data for the accounts receivable, and it will select your sample size. It will prepare the confirmations for you. It will send the confirmations for you. It will receive the confirmations from the customer, and it would also reconcile the confirmation back to the books. And it's all going to do that by simply putting in your QuickBooks data into a little software, and it's going to do all that work. So at the end of the day, the world is changing, and accounting and auditing, and no matter what your source of profession is, it's changing. And technology will continue to overtake human functions. What's missing in AI, it seems, is the human side of it. But that's coming as well. So what I'd like to do is just play this IBM commercial. Some of you might have seen it. I thought it was pretty good, sort of telling you where the future might be going.
Hey, Dad. Come meet the new guy.
The new guy? What new guy?
I hired some help. He really knows his wine.
This is the new guy?
Hello, my name is Watson.
You know wine, huh?
I know that you should check Vineyard Block 12.
Block 12.
My analysis of satellite imagery shows it would benefit from decreased irrigation.
I was wondering about that.
Easy boy. Nice doggy.
What do you think?
Not bad.
So it's a nice commercial there. a person who's owned a winery for a long, long time, knows everything about grapes and growing wine, and all of a sudden a new little computer is telling him what to do. And at first he might go, how is a computer going to tell me what to do? And he quickly finds out that the computer actually thinks too, because it knows how to measure the water and so forth. So however, whatever artificial intelligence is, there's a movie called that too, if you remember that Spielberg movie. It's coming, right? And it's going to affect each and every one of us in this room, and it's probably going to happen a lot faster than we think. So that's really all I wanted to touch there. It affects my world and the auditing world. It affects your world, no matter what business you're doing. And artificial intelligence is going to affect our life. The third big picture global that I wanted to discuss is global trends between the millennials and the baby boomers. So I didn't know this before today because I didn't know the exact years. But for the record, if you are a millennial, you are born between 1980 to 1995. Do we have millennials here? Don't be shy. Are there any millennials here? Okay, good. Okay, good. If you're a baby boomer, and by the way, there's a generation between, which is I, and I'll get to that in a moment. You're born before 1963. And how many baby boomers do we have here? Don't be shy. Okay, so we got a good representation of baby boomers, and actually got a pretty good representation of millennials. And then there's guys like me. I was born in 1977. I'm Generation X, I think. Generation X or Y. X, is that right? Okay, how many are around my age, in between? Well, not bad, actually, it's a lot more than I thought. Now I don't know what to say next. Okay. So there's clearly differences between the baby boomers and the millennials, the way things are done, the way we work, and the way we spend money. And then there's sort of what I consider my generation, where we feel like we're in between. We understand what's being called the old school way of life. However, we're kind of tech savvy too, because we grew up around iPhones and things like that. We're not, though, quite like the millennials in the sense that we sit next to each other, and instead of talking, we're texting. Okay, we don't do that, and some of the millennials do that. We're also not like the baby boomers, where we only do phone calls or in-person meetings. We do emails, we do texts as well. So one of the challenges in the business environment globally is the trends between the baby boomers and the millennials. So the old school way of thinking, right, from a spending point of view, is we go to a store, right? The old school. I'll say, when I say we, I see the old school. We go to a store, we buy stuff. We want a BMW, we want a Tesla, we want a Lexus. Whereas clearly the new spending patterns, and everybody knows this, is online. Amazon delivers my goods, right? I go online. I don't go into a store to try clothing. Who does that anymore, right? I buy online. And this stat I thought was interesting. I think everybody in the room would know that online shopping versus retail shopping is completely changing. So 16.4% of old spending patterns, right, are online, the baby boomers, whereas the millennials are spending 41% of their shopping online rather than going into a store. And I'm going to pick on a millennial here, right? In your observation might be different than other millennials, but it seems to me at least that the millennials are looking for experiences, not stuff. The baby boomers want stuff, you know? The millennials want experiences, right? So then you start to think, how does that affect my world, right? What are the kind of industries that are going to boom and bust later on in the future? So even in my world, while it's important to know IFRS and upcoming things, right? You know, we're focusing more on the client experience, because at the end of the day, you know, it's how you make people feel, right? And if computers are going to figure out the IFRSs, right? And if computers are going to figure out how to sample accounts receivable and, you know, who to send confirmations to and how to reconcile all that stuff, well, what are we going to be left doing, right? So the point is that the experience part of things has become quite important in the global spending trends. And then on the working habits. So we did at Davidson Company, every once in a while, we have an internal function where we have all of our staff participate in something. And we did this thing called the Davidson Derby. It's kind of a neat little thing. You go from station to station. One of them was trivia. Another one, you taste worms and gummy bears and, and dog food mixed with toothpaste and, all kinds of different challenges, right? And then we did this thing, Family Feud, at the end. So one of the questions was, if you were partner for a day, what would be the first thing you did? Right? And then many people have the usual things, like I'd pay myself more, right? I do this and that. About 15%, and I might be off by 5 or 10%, but about 15 or 20% actually said, I'll work from home, right? So if I had one day as an audit partner in accounting firm, what would I do? I'd work from home today. That's what I do. So the old school way of thinking is, no. You come into the office, you start at 7 a.m. and you don't leave here minimum until 7 p.m. because that's 12 hours and anything. And if you want lunch break, go ahead and take 10 minutes, but you come back to that desk and you finish your work, Whereas the new patterns will say, no. I get up, I go for a workout, right? I need my workout, and then I need my protein shake, and I like to eat my oatmeal, or at least that's how I do it. And I'd like to work from home today because maybe my kids are at home, or I got to do some other things, or maybe my commute is an hour and a half, and instead of driving into downtown for 1.5, can I stay home today instead? Because that's going to save me 3 hours today. Fair enough. And so, whereas my generation kind of goes, well, I want to come into the office, actually. I like to see people and I like to talk to people. But maybe I'll take off and do a couple hours from home later on tonight, because after my kids are asleep, and my wife came here today for a couple hours to see me too, after my kids are asleep, I'm going to start working again for a couple more hours. So the other patterns that are happening too is a lot of the old school baby boomers will say that the millennials are entitled. They want everything to come to them like that, quick and easy, and not work for it, just give it to me as is, right? And whereas the millennials will say, well, no, that's not how we see it. We're willing to work hard, but we'd rather have it our own way. We'll still get the work done, but just our own way. So then you have to say, how does it affect me, right? And how do I deal with that? And I guess the task for my generation, can I see everybody from my generation once again, the Generation X? So in theory, right? In theory, they say, whoever they are, we're supposed to be the bridge, okay? The bridge between the baby boomers and the millennials, because in theory we have some understanding of the new way and we have a little bit of an understanding of the old way. And so in your organizations, you have different people of different ages. And I'm actually quite happy that in this audience, it was actually a pretty equal representation of millennials, Generation X, and baby boomers. So our challenge is to understand each other and to have open conversations and to know that the way business is done today in the world will be different tomorrow. In summary, on big global issues, China is about to spend a lot of money in the next 10 to 20 years building up its infrastructure. Artificial intelligence, in whatever form it will come, will affect each person in this room in one shape or the other. And we must all look at the spending and working habits of the different generations that we have living today. And it's probably the first time in history where we have so many generations still alive. And I'd argue that it's the first time in human history where we really have to deal with that, because previously we didn't have that many generations living together. In Canada, the marijuana thing's becoming a big deal. Plus or minus, the economy is doing pretty good. The US is at full employment, so anything better is just growth at this stage. I'd argue that the US is doing pretty good. It just has to keep it up economically. And I think that sort of summarizes my bit there. So thank you for your patience, for listening to me, and thank you.